Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. My name is Plami, and in this episode of Plami's Thoughts On, I'm gonna be sharing my thoughts on Far Cry New Dawn, which for those of you who don't know is the DLC to the most recently released Far Cry game, Far Cry 5. And yeah, before we get into it, I do want to say that a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video in regards to the game are things that I've already said during my playthrough of the game, which you can check out on my YouTube channel. Just look up Far Cry New Dawn, and don't be bothered by the quality in the first like 3 or 4 videos. After that it goes much higher, even though it's still not like top tier YouTube level, and that is not really up to me at that point because YouTube's codecs are shit. So even though I upload a relatively high quality video, it still goes to shit because of YouTube. So it's not up to me. If you're gonna hate somebody for it, hate YouTube. But anyway, I really enjoyed playing through Far Cry New Dawn, but it's not a game without its faults. In terms of how much I like it compared to the other games like Far Cry 3, which is easily my favorite Far Cry, and Far Cry 5, which I also enjoy quite a lot, I would say that it's maybe a little worse in Far Cry 5 than Far Cry 5, but also in some ways better. Like, it's in this weird middle ground where in some ways I would consider Far Cry to be the superior game, but it's somewhere it is better. In the ways that it is worse would mainly be the repetitive nature of the gameplay in Far Cry 5. I really enjoyed Far Cry 5 in Far Cry Dawn. I really enjoyed Far Cry 5 because it felt like the biggest Far Cry world that we've got to experience, because it had like 3 different places that you can go to compared to Far Cry 3, which has only 2, and Far Cry 4, which I don't really think that it had that much, but it was definitely much more than Far Cry 3. And in Far Cry New Dawn, we do get to play in a lot of the same places, but it's still nowhere as big as Far Cry 5. And Far Cry 5 still offers a lot of different things you can do in all these different locations. Far Cry New Dawn, on the other hand, still has a lot of things that you can do, but it feels much more repetitive because you're doing it in the same places. Like, the big thing that I'm talking about is the expeditions and the outposts. In other Far Cry games, you would have different outposts with different levels. Like, some outposts would be level 1, some would be level 2 and level 3. So that's not a new thing that they've added for Far Cry New Dawn. But the difference is that in Far Cry New Dawn, it's each outpost having a different level, not having different outposts at different levels. And that just makes the game feel more tedious and more repetitive. At least for me it did, because I was also trying to finish it as quickly as possible, because I didn't expect it to be as big of a game as it was. I would have honestly preferred if it was just like the 10 outposts that we have and not have to do them at different levels. Because at a certain point, it's just the game forcing you to grind for the sake of resources, which is the same for the expeditions. I do like the idea of expeditions, like having these little smaller, much smaller open worlds where you're supposed to not destroy an outpost and kill everybody, but sneak in, take something and run away. That is really cool, and it goes back to some of the things that I liked about Far Cry 3. Like, my favorite mission in Far Cry 3 is the one where you sneak in to Vass's compounds and act as if you're one of his soldiers. That is one of the most memorable parts of Far Cry 3 for me. I love that part. So that was a really cool comeback to that time. But again, just like the outposts, it's just you doing again and again those 7 outposts. And it becomes tedious because to upgrade your weapons, you need all these resources. So you either have to go around the map and find them, or you have to grind at taking out outposts and getting these expeditions or doing these expeditions. So it's a cool idea, but there's definitely ways to improve it. So I hope they do for Far Cry 6. Another thing that I like about Far Cry New Dawn is the upgradability of your base. It's a neat idea, but again, it definitely could be better executed. I wish that when you upgraded it, you could actually notice visual upgrades and that it actually mattered beyond just a number on a screen. Like, for example, when you upgrade the infirmary, maybe you get more med packs that you can find around the location, you know? And I want them to also visually change, but in a big way, not just small details like expanding a room or something like that. I want big visual changes. Because especially in the world of Far Cry New Dawn specifically, which was like a post-apocalyptic world with like communities and stuff, I wish the upgradability of your base played a bigger part in this, because that's one of the coolest things that I like about post-apocalyptic media, and especially post-apocalyptic zombie media, which this is not a zombie game, but it still plays a lot of the similar tropes of it. Like in zombie apocalypse media, I love the idea of building up your community or base or whatever with stronger walls and cooler new things. So I feel like maybe, even though it's probably not gonna happen because this is a first-person shooter, not a Minecraft or a Raft kind of game, or The Forest, which is a really cool game that I found out recently. I do wish that they would add more customizability to your base that you can actually expand in a meaningful way. What else did Far Cry New Dawn did better? The villains, I think they did better, but only marginally so. I think the villains largely in Far Cry are kind of shit. The Far Cry 3 villains for me worked, not only because Vaas and his actor is freaking amazing and interesting and really cool, but also because of the nature of what the Far Cry 3 game was, which is like a 90s action movie. That's what it felt to me, at least. That's how I see that game. It's a nostalgic, cliched 90s action movie, and that's why I love it, personally. But in Far Cry 4, the villain was just obnoxiously pretentious, and it didn't really work for me. He just kept talking shit and didn't really do much outside of the opening of the game. That's pretty much the most memorable moment that we have of him. In Far Cry 5, the villains were a little better, but still not really that great. They just kept talking and talking and talking, and they're just not interesting. They're just fucking egomaniacs who are not fun to watch. Out of the villains in Far Cry, I would say Faith was the most interesting one, but even then, it was still really not that great. But in this game, I do think Mickey and Lou are actually pretty damn okay. At first, I thought that they were still kind of the obnoxious, typical Far Cry villain, but they actually grew to be pretty interesting, and I actually really like their death scene at the end there, where you kind of feel the tragedy of it, the tragedy of their characters, because their mom warned them against following in their father's footsteps, and they still did. And the sisterly bond at the end there, seeing that one of the sisters died, was kind of tragic. It resonated with me, even though I don't have siblings, but yeah, I really like that. And also, I think Joseph Seed was a better character in this game than he was in Far Cry 5, because in Far Cry 5, he was just like the villain of Far Cry 4. I think it was Pagan Min or something like that. He just kept talking and spouting obnoxious bullshit, and it's just annoying. It's not fun. It's just annoying, to me at least. But in this game, you can actually see more of a three-dimensional character with him and his son Ethan, seeing that Joseph has a more caring and more normal and human side to him. It really improved the character for me because he was really, really annoying and obnoxious in Far Cry 5. Even though he was ultimately correct about the prophecy about the end of the world and all that stuff, he was much more interesting in this one. And Ethan as well is a really interesting character. Um, with him uh, being a son to his father, literally hearing all the stuff that he talks about God and God's plan and all that stuff, it it just built up this kind of egocentric thing to him where he felt like he was the chosen one and he was supposed to be the one to lead humanity or whatever. Like the characters are much better than Far Cry 5, for sure. But the problem with this game is the pacing as well. I think that's the biggest thing about it. When I got into it, because it's a DLC, I expected that it was probably going to be shorter than the main game, and it was, by about 4 episodes, I think. But it wasn't really that great because by the point where you kind of start to fight back against the sisters, where you join with Joseph's Seed, it's kind of towards the end of the game. Like there's like 3 or 4 missions that you have to do. And another really good thing about this game is the fact that it's just a sequel in general. I love sequels, especially sequels that take place years, like a long time, like 20 years after the previous one. Just seeing the worlds in which and how they've developed, the universe of the movies or the video games or the TV shows, how they've developed in those 20 years and how they've changed, and seeing them reference past events which you've experienced before, it's just really cool to me. I love that stuff, and I love it even more when it comes to post-apocalyptic media. That's why I love this so much. Seeing Carmina, which is the child of 2 characters, or should I say 1 character, because I don't know if we ever saw his wife in Far Cry 5, or at least I don't remember her. And it's so cool seeing their daughter and her being the one that you work with throughout Far Cry New Dawn. At least that was the case for me, because I liked her as a character instantly, even though I wish she played a more major role and that it mattered the fact that I was using her as my guns for hire for the whole game mattered more to the game. Like she was more of a character, not just of a main character, not just a side character. But yeah, the things that I think Far Cry New Dawn did worse was the pacing. I think that's the biggest thing it failed at, because when I started playing it, because it was a DLC, I expected that it was going to be a shorter game, and it was by a little bit, but the pacing was just all over the place. I feel like the game was expecting me to explore the map more before I get into the story, so it kind of feels jumbled. Like by the time we join with Joseph Seed to fight the Highwaymen, I think it's like 3/4 into the game when it should be about halfway. It was just structured very badly to me. And then by the end of the game, when you defeat the sisters, then afterwards you have another boss battle. It's just not paced very well. I feel like things like the escaping from prison mission or killing that person there should have been right after the midpoint of the game, which it wasn't. And again, I think the joining with Joseph Seed should have been the halfway point of the game, like the mid-season finale kind of thing. Like the first half of the game should have been us suffering under the Highwaymen. In the middle of the game, we find ways how we can fight back and join with Joseph Seed, and then in the second half, we should be fighting back against the sisters and seeing some of the consequences, like Rush's death, or the fact that and then maybe when we are and maybe just space out the final two battles against the sisters and against Ethan, because both are very tedious to do if you don't have the powerful weapons. They're so annoying. And I feel like having Ethan as the final villain kinda undermines the characters of Mickey and Lou as villains, because while they're pretty hard to beat, once you have the right weapons, it's actually kinda easy. Like, you can see in my gameplay how much I struggled when I first got to that mission, and then when I got the better weapons, how easily I dispatched them. But then when I was fighting Ethan, it took me like, what, 15, 20, 30 minutes to defeat him? Yeah, overall it's a pretty good game, but even then, the full-on experience with the story and the characters just doesn't hit the same way as Far Cry 3. And at this point I feel like we shouldn't really expect as good of a game as Far Cry 3, because Far Cry 3 is just like a lightning in a bottle kind of game. It's just perfect. It just has enough of an improvement over the past Far Cry games, and it hasn't gotten to a point where it would overindulge into certain things. And also, as I said, it just called back to nostalgic times of like the 90s and 80s of the action movies. It felt very reminiscent of that, which is why I really like it that much. Another game that to me personally gives me the same kind of feeling is Driver San Francisco. Even though it's a very different genre of games because it's a racing game, it's definitely a recommendation that I would give almost anybody. It's a really good game with a really good story that is also very nostalgic and 80s, 90s action movie-like. But yeah, overall I enjoy Far Cry New Dawn, but I think I enjoyed it less than Far Cry 5. Even though it had some good additions about it, the best way I can put it is if Far Cry 5 had the Far Cry New Dawn characters and some of the new additions in Far Cry New Dawn, like the expeditions and the upgradability of your base, I would have liked it much more, because overall I think Far Cry 5 was the better game in terms of everything, but Far Cry New Dawn has some of the better elements of it. I think that's the best way to put it. So yeah, in terms of how I would rate the game, I think I would put it at an 8.4 out of 10. And for comparison, right now I would give Far Cry 3 a 9.3 out of 10 and Far Cry 5 an 8.8 out of 10. So yeah, it's a solid game. I think most people who enjoy Far Cry games will enjoy it because it has some cool things. Like the expeditions alone are definitely worth it because they're so fun to do. But if you hate repetitiveness, I don't know, I think you're gonna be bothered just like me, because it does get tedious, especially when you're just trying to get through the story and just end the game, because that's what I do with my gameplay on my YouTube channel. I tend to focus on the story, not really the gameplay, because I'm not playing it for fun, but to finish the story. If I was playing it on my own, I would probably overindulge myself a little bit more, but yeah, I don't know. It's up to you, ultimately. I definitely recommend it, but it's up to you whether you want to play it or not. If for nothing else, it's just a cool game to see what happens to all the characters in Far Cry, from Far Cry 5. Even though it kind of canonizes the ending, because I personally prefer to think that Far Cry 5 ended with the characters being kind of like drugged, like seeing the end of the world because of the drugs, not because the end of the world is actually happening. Because after the ending scene, you're back in Far Cry 5 in Hope County as if nothing happened. How do you explain that? But yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. Also, check out the description to my Twitter if you want to follow me there, and to my Wattpad where I post my stories. Because in addition to doing all these videos on my channel, I'm also a writer. And if you don't enjoy my stories or you simply enjoy my videos, you can head over to Patreon where you can pledge support and help get the channel going, help support me so I can keep writing the stories you enjoy. But if you don't want to do it, that's completely fine. You can still help me out in other ways, like liking this video, subscribing, and especially sharing this video with somebody who you think might enjoy it. And I think that's pretty much it for this video, so hopefully I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye!